Hi, I'm Victor McGill and I'd like to talk about the science of connecting. In so many ways today we've become disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from other people, disconnected from the world that we live in. But there is a science of connecting. It's called the system sciences. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that and how we can use that to reconnect ourselves and move forward in our lives. So let's start with a little bit of history. The age of science began about 400 years ago, and one of the key figures was René Descartes. You might know him as the person who said, "I think, therefore I am." But he developed this way of thinking, rational thinking. So instead of being caught up with our own opinions and personal biases, he wanted a way to separate ourselves out from what was happening so that we just talk about the facts of how things are, things that we can measure. And that became the basis of science as we know it. It gave us man on the moon. It allowed us to go into the depths of the ocean. It gave us all the medical advancements that we've had that prolong our life. It gave us cars to drive and mobile phones to use. But that objective view of standing apart from the world has created splits all through our world and has led to the disconnection that we face. So mind became split from body, body became split into body systems, we became split between us and nature and between other people. And we've also become split from our history of where we came from and who we are. So this fundamental concept of science is called reductionism, that breaks things down into its parts. The problem, of course, if you break it down into parts, is you miss the relationship between those parts. You only see things as separate. And we've come to see all the different things in our world as separate, and has created many of the problems that we have today. So the result has been pollution, greed, poverty, injustice, climate change. Everywhere you look, the way that we've separated things out seems to have caused problems for us. Indigenous people have very often maintained the sense of connectedness that we tend to have lost. Now, I live in New Zealand, and the Indigenous people here are the Māori people. And they've maintained their sense of connectedness to the land, to the mountains, to the rivers, connectedness to their tribe, connectedness to their spirit. Now, there's a way of thinking about this that comes from the Māori world, which is called te whare tapawhā. Whare is a house and tapawhā is four walls. And so any house, any building has four walls that hold it together. If you've got the four walls up against each other, it's a very strong thing. But if you've only got one wall or one wall missing, it's not as strong. So the idea is that a person is like a house, and that there are four parts to who we are as a human being. And so we have the physical, which is called the tinana, which includes our body, our health, diet, sleep, exercise, hygiene, physical things in the world. So it also includes housing, money and transport. Then we have hinangaru as another part, which is our mind, our thinking, our emotions and our values and beliefs. Another side is whānau, relationships, social, with our partners, families, friends, work relationships, sport relationships, whatever. And it's not just saying relationships are really important, they're saying relationships is who we are. And then finally there's wairua, the spirit, that's the oneness and the harmony that integrates the whole being. And so even though I've talked about them as four separate parts, they're just totally interlinked. So if you change one, it has an impact on the other, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. So it's a very simple but a very useful model that shows that connectedness that we have between us, and that connects us to our ancestors through the past and what we've become. It connects us with nature, it connects us with other people in our lives, and that wholeness that we seek. So that's held in many of the Indigenous traditions and is a useful place to look and see how there are people who've maintained that connectedness. Here we see an example of a Tibetan sand mandala, and again we see in the different colours there the different aspects of the mind. So this is like a map of the mind, in the same way we might have a map of a country or a place, but here is a map of what our mind is like, showing the different parts, and what we want to do is to integrate them together as a whole complete unit. So there is a science of connection, and it's called the system sciences. And what we find is when we go back and we focus on connecting, then the whole way that we look at things has to be refocused, and it gives us a way of coming back to the nature, to the connectedness that is naturally a part of who we are. Now this is called the adaptive cycle, and it's a cycle of life. So what we find if we look down in the lower left box, which has got the exploitation or growth. So in a system there is a time when things start new and grow and grow and grow, and you can see it rising really rapidly, but nothing can completely grow forever, just going bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually that growth will slow down a little, and then you enter into the conservation phase. From the conservation phase you slip down into the release phase, where the way that things have been can no longer be held, and so there has to be something let go. And we let go of those things that have become frozen, that have become too rigid and too linear. And when we've released them, we then have a space to reorganize things, which can bring us back to the beginning of the cycle. So there's a life and death, a natural cycle, and we can see that cycle in all the different systems that we have, the human systems, social systems, in forests, computer systems, no matter what, you'll see this pattern being played out. The earliest forms of life are single-celled creatures like this paramecium that you're looking at. And so this is the beginning of the body. And so the body is the foundation of all life, and all higher levels of life build upon the body. Now a paramecium uses glucose as food, and so when it recognizes that the concentration of glucose is increasing, it continues in that direction. But if it notices that concentration is decreasing, it turns around and moves in a different direction, and that helps it to survive. So that gives that body wisdom exists even in a single-celled creature. But that body wisdom is something that we retain, a direct knowing and ability to interact with our world through our body directly. And of course, as human beings, we have expanded on that, and we have emotions and we have thoughts. And so you can see our evolutionary history through time, developing emotions, developing thinking, is actually written in our body. So our body starts with the simple cells, but development of our brain shows the steps that we've come through in our evolution over the period of time. And so here we see a picture of the brain, and if you look at the bottom, the bit coming up from the bottom, that is the part of the brain which is about basic survival, fight or flight, and basic instincts. And so it's sometimes called the reptile brain because that's the only brain that reptiles have. So they're just able to keep themselves alive and not much more. But on top of that, we then have the limbic system, which controls emotions, and on top of that we have the cerebral cortex, which is where our thinking comes. And so we can see that building layer upon layer upon layer has enabled us to be what we are. And so the way that everything connects becomes more and more complex as we evolve over time. Here we have a picture of a horse and coach, and it just gives a nice little image about the way the different parts fit together. So as we talked about, the parts, the social and mind and the body and everything fitting together in the same way, the horse, the coach, the driver and the passengers all have to play their part and all have to be working well for the horse and coach to get where it goes. And so it's similar with us as human beings. The body, the mind, the thinking, the emotions, everything has to work in balance. And then sometimes the emotions get out of control, and it's a little bit like the horses get out of control with the horse and coach, and the driver's got to struggle to bring the coach back in. So it's just about that connectedness in different parts working in together to create something new and whole. So our physical body is made up of a number of body systems, but they're not separate at all. They're all totally interlinked. If you don't have the blood pumping to all the different things, then nothing works. And the nervous system and the endocrine system, they link in really, really strongly. So the way that our brain and our nervous system works is not only about the electrical pulses and signals that go, but it's very much about the hormones and the chemicals of the endocrine system are a part of the way that our brain works and how we make sense of the world. We usually think of our mind as arising from our brain, but if we take a wider perspective and see the mind as that which enables us to act in the world, and we can see that we have come together as large societies in very complex ways, and one of the ways that we've done that is by extending our mind back into the world again. So in the same way, you look at a car as an extension of our physical body, and we operate it and so that we can travel further and much faster than we could possibly do with our body. So in a way, the car is an extension of the body. We also extend our mind in that same way. And every time we write a shopping list, use our mobile phone, use a computer, we're doing this extending back into the world. And that's another way that we're all connected together at the level of mind. Now there's patterns also in the world, and here you'll see these patterns called fractals. And if you have a look at the picture of the tree and the picture of the mountains, there's a similarity in the way those patterns work. And what you find is if you zoom in on the patterns in the tree or the patterns in the mountain, the patterns keep repeating no matter what level you look at it. If you look at a little twig from a tree, it has the same basic shape as the whole overall tree, and that's one of the basic patterns in nature, and that's reflected in our body. You know, our lungs follow those same branching patterns, and in our brain is exactly the same. We tend to think of ourselves as a structure. This is my body, this is me, this is who I am. But we can just as easily look at ourselves as a process unfolding over time. Have a look at this river, for example. We look at the river and we recognize the river as a structure. It's a thing. We look at it and that's a river and we understand it. But if you look at the water that's flowing through in 1 minute is not at all the same as the water that's flowing through later on. And so the river as it was yesterday is not the same as today, is not the same as tomorrow. But we're the same as human beings. What I was like when I was a child, as a 20-year-old, as a 30-year-old, is not the same as I am now. And so I can see myself as a flowing process through time as much as I can see myself as a structure. Connecting to the past. It's another part of being connected, so that all of those things that our ancestors have done in their lives have come and had an impact on who we are. And so all of the things that have developed through civilization are things that have happened through times, and we've developed psychologically. So it's useful to go back, learn about our ancestors and where they're from, and they can also give us psychological lessons about some of the things that we might struggle with in our lives. And so, just to summarize, we can use the science of systems, the science of connecting, as a way of bringing ourselves back to seeing our whole body and mind as one joint unit. They're not separate, they're linked in together. Our brain extends into the world, and we can reconnect back with other people, we can reconnect with nature, we can reconnect with our past, and we can then become who we truly are.